Picture this. It's January 30th, 1943. Hermann Göring, commander of the German Air Force, stands before microphones in Berlin's broadcasting house, ready to celebrate 10 years of Nazi power. He once boasted to Hitler, "No enemy plane will fly over the Reich territory." In moments, he'll eat those words, delivered by a bomber made of plywood and glue. This is the story of the de Havilland Mosquito, the aircraft that rewrote the rules of aerial warfare and drove Nazi Germany to the edge of madness. The year is 1940, and Britain is bleeding metal. Bombers are falling from the skies in horrifying numbers. The German Air Force, also known as the Luftwaffe, is decimating them faster than factories can replace them. Every household has surrendered their pots, gates, and railings to the war effort, melted down for aircraft production. Into this crisis steps Sir Geoffrey de Havilland with a proposal so absurd it borders on insanity. He wants to build a bomber out of wood with no guns. The government laughed at us, de Havilland would later recall. The Air Ministry rejected it outright. How could a wooden plane compete in an age of the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and the Spitfire? Wood belonged to the previous war, to biplanes and barnstormers, not modern combat. But de Havilland wasn't asking for permission anymore. Backed by Air Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman, one of the few men who saw the genius in the madness, he pushed forward using his own factory and resources. Skeptics multiplied. They called it Freeman's folly. They said it would snap apart in midair. They predicted total failure, yet there was method to this madness. Britain didn't just need metal, it needed speed. De Havilland's radical idea was simple. Forget armor, forget gun turrets, forget everything that made bombers slow and vulnerable. Build something so fast that the enemy couldn't catch it in the first place. The prototype took shape in a country house near London, assembled by an unlikely army of craftsmen, furniture makers, piano builders, men whose hands knew wood like a language. They worked with Canadian birch and Ecuadorian balsa, creating thin veneers laminated in molds, forming curved fuselage halves that were glued together down the center line. It looked like something a child might build, a giant model airplane. On November 25, 1940, the Mosquito flew for the first time, and immediately, everything changed. They raced it against a Spitfire Mark V, Britain's frontline fighter, the pride of the Royal Air Force. Everyone expected the wooden bomber to lag behind, to prove the skeptics right. The Mosquito left the Spitfire eating its dust at every altitude. Jaws dropped, doubts evaporated. The wooden wonder had just been born, and it was about to become Germany's worst nightmare. But the Mosquito had another advantage that nobody, not even de Havilland himself, had anticipated, and the British wouldn't fully understand it until the aircraft had been in service for months. The wooden construction made it nearly invisible to radar. German Würzburg radar stations, which had been so effective at tracking incoming British bombers, struggled to detect mosquitoes. Metal aircraft reflected radio waves beautifully. They lit up German radar screens like Christmas trees. But wood? Wood absorbed or scattered much of the radar energy. The Mosquito's radar cross-section was a fraction of what it should have been for an aircraft its size. One German radar operator later recalled in his post-war debriefing, "We would pick up a contact, scramble fighters to intercept, and then nothing. The blip would simply vanish from our screens. We thought our equipment was malfunctioning. It took us months to realize these were wooden aircraft slipping through our detection network. This wasn't intentional genius. It was a magnificent accident." De Havilland had chosen wood for practical reasons: speed of construction, metal conservation, and structural efficiency. The radar-evading properties were an unexpected gift from the design gods. The combination was devastating for German air defenses. Mosquitoes would appear over targets with little warning, traveling too fast to intercept even when spotted visually. They were ghost planes, there one moment, gone the next, leaving only destruction in their wake. German fighter controllers grew increasingly frustrated. Early warning was everything in air defense. You needed time to scramble fighters, time to climb to altitude, time to position for an intercept. The Mosquito denied them all of that. By the time German radar detected something, if they detected anything at all, and fighters reached interception altitude, the wooden bombers were already racing back across the North Sea toward England. A Luftwaffe tactical assessment from late 1942 noted with evident irritation. Enemy wooden aircraft demonstrate reduced radar detectability. Standard interception procedures prove ineffective. Recommend visual observation networks be expanded. In other words, since we can't see them on radar, we need more people standing outside with binoculars. It was a solution from the previous war trying to counter an aircraft from the future, and it didn't work. Let's understand what made this impossible aircraft work, because the engineering was as audacious as the concept. While other fighters were built from aluminum and steel, the Mosquito's airframe consisted of spruce plywood and balsa wood, bonded with a specialized adhesive in a sandwich structure. This wasn't just slapping planks together. The construction created a smooth, rivetless skin that reduced drag dramatically. Better still, it freed up metal for tanks and warships while allowing furniture factories across Britain to produce aircraft components without massive industrial machinery or welding equipment. At peak production, one Mosquito rolled off the assembly line every single day, an astonishing feat for a nation under siege. But here's where it gets fascinating. This wooden frame housed two Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same power plants driving Spitfires and Lancaster bombers, generating a combined 3,000 horsepower. The result, 400 miles per hour in level flight, faster than most contemporary fighters, faster than almost anything the Germans could throw at it. And unlike a racing car stripped to nothing, the Mosquito carried a serious punch. Its bomb bay could swallow a 4,000-pound Cookie blast bomb, the same massive weapon carried by four-engine Lancasters with their 7-man crews. 2 men in a wooden plane could deliver nearly the same payload as a B-17 Flying Fortress, which needed 10 crew members, 13 machine guns, formation flying, and fighter escorts just to survive the mission. The B-17 could reach Berlin, yes, but the comparison was sobering. Then came the variants, and this is where the Mosquito transformed from impressive to absolutely terrifying. The fighter bomber version packed devastating firepower, 4 20mm Hispano cannons in the belly and 4.303 Browning machine guns mounted above them, all crammed into the nose. Unlike wing-mounted weapons that required precise convergence points, this concentration of firepower meant every gun fired from essentially the same spot straight ahead. The pilot just had to point and shoot. The burst rate? Roughly 1,000 cannon rounds per minute, plus 5,000 machine gun rounds. Pilots described it as firing a fire hose of metal. One veteran Mosquito pilot later wrote, "You could see the shells walking toward the target like a line of fire." Nothing survived that. Adding all this weaponry only reduced the Mosquito's speed by 10 to 15 miles per hour. German trains, trucks, ships, airfields, anything in its sights was shredded. And when German fighters appeared, the Mosquito simply opened its throttles and vanished. As one Luftwaffe pilot bitterly noted, chasing a Mosquito was like a man on foot chasing a deer. The Mosquito entered service in mid-1941, initially for photo reconnaissance. Painted blue, it would stalk enemy positions across Nazi-occupied Europe, practically invisible, unreachable. If spotted, it would race home before interceptors could climb to altitude. The intelligence photographs it captured led to bombing raids that caused the Germans catastrophic setbacks. But reconnaissance was just the beginning. As Mosquitoes arrived in greater numbers, they revolutionized how the RAF waged war. You see, daylight bombing was considered suicide. Only the Americans were bold or foolish enough to attempt it, losing thousands of air crews and hundreds of bombers in the process. British doctrine insisted on night raids only. The Mosquito changed that calculus entirely. Bomber units began experimenting with daring low-level daylight attacks. Small formations would fly under German radar at suicidal altitudes, literally skimming treetops, then strike high-value targets with surgical precision. 2 men in a weird wooden plane, as one officer called it, were inflicting more damage than formations of hundreds of heavy bombers. September 1942, 4 Mosquitoes executed a long-distance strike against Gestapo headquarters in Oslo, Norway. They skimmed across the North Sea and bombed the building, killing senior German officials and proving that Nazi leadership was never truly safe. The Germans shot down 1 Mosquito, but the rest returned home. That day, the aircraft kept secret from the public for so long, was finally revealed to the world. British propaganda had a field day. The Timber of Terror was mocking the Third Reich, and there was nothing they could do about it. During one raid over France, a group of mosquitoes encountered a pair of Focke-Wulf 190s, the Butcher Bird, that had been terrorizing Spitfire pilots and racking up kills with its powerful BMW radial engine. The 190 was Germany's fastest, most modern fighter. The mosquitoes simply opened their throttles and left them behind. German pilots were left chasing contrails, firing at empty sky. One Luftwaffe ace reportedly radioed back in frustration. "They're not running away, they're mocking us." And he was right. The wooden bombers had turned the hunters into the hunted, and it was driving the Germans absolutely mad. Within months, the RAF discovered the Mosquito could do almost anything. Night fighting, equipped with radar and send it prowling. Anti-shipping, load it with 8 underwing rockets, each capable of crippling a vessel with a single hit. Submarine hunting, mount a 57mm Moulins gun that could punch through a U-boat's pressure hull like tissue paper. They even converted bomb bays to carry cargo and people. The famous physicist Niels Bohr escaped Nazi-occupied Denmark crammed into a mosquito's belly, though he passed out from a faulty oxygen mask during the flight. The pilot noticed him slumped over and saved him by diving to lower altitude. The Swiss Army knife of Allied aircraft, the weapon that shouldn't exist, doing everything it wasn't supposed to do, but nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to what happened on January 30th, 1943. It was the 10th anniversary of Hitler's rise to power, and the Nazis planned a massive celebration in Berlin. Radio broadcasts, speeches from the highest ranks of the Reich. Hermann Göring, Reichsmarschall and commander of the Luftwaffe, was scheduled to address the nation from Berlin's main broadcasting house at 11 a.m. sharp. Göring had famously declared, "If enemy bombers reach the Ruhr, my name is not Hermann Göring. You can call me Meyer." The Mosquito was about to make him regret those words. 3 mosquitoes skimmed in at low altitude, threading through Germany's supposedly impenetrable air defenses. They arrived at exactly 11 a.m., precisely when Göring was stepping up to the microphone. Air raid sirens wailed in broad daylight over Berlin. The mosquitoes dropped 500-pound bombs on the radio station. The building shook. Göring was reportedly boiling with rage and humiliation as his speech was delayed by the very thing he'd promised would never happen. Berlin, he'd said, would never be bombed by the Allies. But the Mosquito crews weren't finished trolling the Nazi high command. Later that same afternoon, as propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels prepared his well-rehearsed speech, another flight of mosquitoes pulled the exact same stunt. Goebbels, the master of propaganda, the man who controlled Germany's narrative, was forced to dive for cover like a common soldier. 1 mosquito was lost. The other 5 returned home to a hero's welcome. The raids made front-page news across the Allied world. 6 uninvited wooden planes had crashed the Nazi anniversary party, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing, the Germans could do about it. A British newspaper headline read, "Wooden Wonder Strikes Berlin, Göring Eats Crow." The psychological impact was devastating. If Berlin wasn't safe in broad daylight, nowhere was safe. But perhaps the most daring Mosquito mission was still to come. Operation Jericho, February 1944. Amiens prison in occupied France held French resistance fighters awaiting execution by the Gestapo. Intelligence indicated they had days, perhaps hours, to live. A ground rescue was impossible. The prison was too heavily guarded. The only option was the Mosquito. 18 mosquitoes, escorted by Typhoon fighters, approached through terrible weather, flying low enough to clip trees. The plan was insane. Bomb the prison walls precisely enough to create escape routes without killing the prisoners inside, then destroy the guard barracks to create chaos. The lead Mosquito pilot, Group Captain Charles Pickard, radioed, "Going in now." His aircraft dove toward the prison walls. The bombs struck with surgical precision. Walls exploded. Guard barracks erupted in flames. In the chaos, hundreds of prisoners ran for their lives. 79 successfully escaped, including key resistance leaders who would continue fighting until liberation. 2 Mosquitoes were shot down, including Pickard's aircraft. He didn't survive, but the raid was filmed by onboard cameras and became legendary. Proof that the Mosquito could achieve the impossible. A French resistance fighter who escaped that day later wrote, "We heard the engines, then the explosions. The walls fell like stage curtains. We thought God himself had sent those wooden angels." But before we discuss how the Germans tried to stop the Mosquito, we need to talk about the men who flew it, because they were as extraordinary as the aircraft itself. Flying a Mosquito required a special kind of partnership. Unlike heavy bombers with crews of 7 to 10 men, the Mosquito carried just 2, pilot and the navigator. There was no bombardier, no gunners, no flight engineer, just 2 men in a cramped wooden cockpit, completely dependent on each other for survival. The bond between Mosquito crews was intense and intimate. As one veteran pilot put it, "We didn't have a crew, we had a partner. You knew everything about each other, your partner's breathing patterns, his stress levels. Whether he was having a good day or a bad one, you had to. Your lives depended on it." Consider Wing Commander Bob Bram, who became the RAF's most decorated airman. Bram and his navigator, Styx Gregory, flew together for years, scoring 29 confirmed kills in their Mosquito night fighter. They developed an almost telepathic understanding. Gregory would spot enemy aircraft on radar and give course corrections in clipped phrases, "left 2 degrees, steady firing range in 5, while Bram flew purely on instruments in pitch darkness, trusting his partner completely. Bram later wrote, "Styx saved my life 12 times over." He was the best navigator in the RAF, and more than that, he was the brother I chose. Then there was Flight Lieutenant Tony Carlisle and his navigator, who flew so many daring low-level raids over Germany that the Luftwaffe reportedly placed a bounty on them specifically. They became legends for a particular trick, flying at wave-top height across the North Sea to avoid radar, then popping up at the last moment to attack coastal targets. German gunners would barely have time to react before the Mosquito was gone, but not all stories had happy endings. Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., the designer's own son, was killed in 1946 while test flying an experimental high-speed Mosquito variant. The aircraft broke apart due to structural failure during a high-speed dive. His father had to identify the body. The man who created the Mosquito lost his son to it. The tragedy revealed something crucial about these crews. They knew the risks, knew the aircraft had limitations, and flew anyway. They believed in the machine and the mission enough to push both to the absolute edge. Squadron leader John Wooldridge, who led the famous 1945 attack on Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen, exemplified this spirit. His Mosquito flew so low during the attack that its propellers churned up water from the harbor. Witnesses said you could see the pilots' faces in the cockpit. Wooldridge's navigator later recalled, "I looked down and saw people on the street staring up at us. We were below the rooftops. It was insane. It was glorious." Perhaps no one embodied the Mosquito spirit more than Group Captain Percy Pickard, who we mentioned earlier, leading Operation Jericho. Pickard was already famous. He'd been featured in a propaganda film earlier in the war. He could have taken a desk job, trained new pilots, stayed safe. Instead, he kept flying combat missions. Before his final flight to Amiens prison, a fellow officer asked him why he kept volunteering for these impossible missions. Pickard reportedly smiled and said, "If we don't come back, at least we tried something worth doing." That's more than most people can say. He didn't come back. His Mosquito was shot down during the prison raid, and he died knowing that dozens of resistance fighters had escaped because of his actions. These weren't just skilled pilots. They were volunteers for suicide missions who happened to survive more often than they should have, thanks to a wooden plane that shouldn't have worked. The psychology was different from heavy bomber crews, too. In a Lancaster or B-17, you were part of a team, surrounded by other men, sharing the danger collectively. In a Mosquito, it was just you and one other person against the entire Third Reich. More intimate, more personal, more intense, and somehow that intimacy made them braver. A navigator named William Bill Blessing, who flew 72 Mosquito missions, described it this way. In a big bomber, you could hide a bit psychologically. There were other blokes around. In the Mossy, there was nowhere to hide, not from the enemy, not from fear, not from yourself. You either faced it together or you didn't come home. That makes you either break or it makes you unbreakable. Most of them became unbreakable. By mid-1944, the Mosquito had become Germany's most frustrating opponent. Not the most destructive. That dubious honor belonged to the 1,000-bomber raids that leveled cities. But the most maddening. A Luftwaffe intelligence report from March 1944 grimly noted, "The Mosquito can reach any target in the Reich with virtual impunity. Our fighter defenses, despite all efforts, have proven largely ineffective against this aircraft." The Germans tried everything. First, they attempted to intercept them with conventional fighters, but catching a Mosquito required being in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, preferably diving from higher altitude to gain speed, then using a brief window to fire before it vanished. One German pilot described the futility. "By the time we reached their altitude, they were already 10 kilometers away. By the time we pursued, they were crossing the channel. Most Mosquito losses came from flak, not fighters, and even those losses were remarkably low. The Mosquito's loss rate throughout the war remained under 1%. Compare that to the 8 to 10% loss rates suffered by heavy bomber formations, and you begin to understand why this wooden plane became legendary. The Germans then developed specialized tactics. They equipped Bf-10-9s and FW-190S with nitrous oxide boost systems, laughing gas, as Allied pilots called it, to give short bursts of speed at high altitude. The idea was to catch Mosquitoes during their photo reconnaissance runs. It rarely worked. The boost systems were unreliable, and pilots could only use them for seconds before risking engine failure. Next came dedicated night fighter squadrons tasked exclusively with hunting Mosquitoes during their intruder missions. These units waited at known approach routes, hoping to ambush the wooden bombers. Some succeeded. Veteran Luftwaffe night fighter Ace Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer shot down several Mosquitoes using these tactics. But for every Mosquito lost, dozens more completed their missions untouched. By late 1944, Germany finally fielded aircraft that could match the Mosquito's speed: the Me-163 Comet rocket interceptor and the Me-262 turbojet fighter. Both could outrun the Mosquito by wide margins and pose genuine threats. But, and this is crucial, there were so few of them. Germany's collapsing war economy and fuel shortages meant these revolutionary aircraft spent more time grounded than flying. Hunting Mosquitoes with jets meant diverting Germany's most capable fighters from defending against the massive bomber streams devastating German cities and factories. The Mosquito had achieved something remarkable. It was so difficult to counter that the Germans had to waste their best resources just trying. And then, in perhaps the ultimate compliment, they tried to copy it. Kurt Tank, the brilliant designer of the Focke-Wulf 190, received orders to create Germany's answer to the Mosquito. The result was the Ta-154 Mosquito. Yes, they even stole the name. It was a twin-engine fighter bomber made of plywood bonded with special adhesive, mimicking the British design almost exactly. Early test flights showed promise. German engineers believed they'd finally found the solution. Then Allied bombers destroyed the factory producing the specialized glue. German engineers scrambled to find substitutes, but the replacement adhesive was inferior. During a test flight, the prototype literally broke apart in mid-air, killing its pilot. A Luftwaffe test report coldly stated, "Structural failure due to inadequate bonding." Aircraft unsuitable for operational use. Only a few dozen Ti-154s were ever built, and they never became an effective force. The irony was delicious. Germany tried to copy the plane everyone said couldn't work, and their copy fell apart. By late 1944, German officers were openly admitting defeat on this front. One Luftwaffe memo read, "No effective countermeasure against the Mosquito has been found. We must accept that certain targets will remain vulnerable to these attacks." That remained true until the very end of the war. So why isn't the Mosquito more famous? Why wasn't it built in even greater numbers and used more extensively? Here's the uncomfortable truth. The Mosquito was brilliant, but it didn't fit the prevailing doctrine. RAF Bomber Command was fixated on 4-engine heavy bombers, Lancasters and Halifaxes that could haul massive bomb loads night after night in 1,000-plane raids. The strategic bombing campaign was about overwhelming destruction, not surgical strikes. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Bomber Harris himself said, "The Mosquito is an excellent weapon, but wars are won by weight of bombs, not by brilliant exceptions." There was also a practical constraint. Every Mosquito required 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same engines demanded by Spitfires, Lancasters, Mustangs, and Hurricanes. Engine production was the bottleneck, and strategic planners had to make hard choices. Additionally, the wooden construction had limitations. In hot, humid climates, Burma, the Pacific, the glue joint sometimes failed and airframes warped under tropical conditions. The Mosquito was a European weapon, best suited to the theater where it was born. It was a precision tool sent when you needed something daring done with speed and accuracy, and every successful raid had the delightful side effect of shutting up the skeptics over and over again, which, let's be honest, was almost as satisfying as bombing Gestapo headquarters. Between 1940 and 1950, nearly 8,000 Mosquitoes were built, an impressive number, though dwarfed by the 20,000 Spitfires or 7,000 Lancasters produced. But numbers don't tell the whole story. The Mosquito flew more than 28,000 operational sorties during the war. It performed every role imaginable: bomber, fighter, night fighter, photo reconnaissance, pathfinder, shipping striker, submarine hunter, fighter bomber, and even courier. No other aircraft in World War II matched this versatility. Its loss rate remained the lowest of any Allied bomber, under 1% across all operations. To put that in perspective, the average loss rate for RAF heavy bombers was over 4% per mission. Over a 30-mission tour, a heavy bomber crew had roughly a 40% chance of being killed or captured. Mosquito crews? Their survival odds were dramatically better. One Mosquito pilot, Wing Commander Bob Bram, the RAF's most decorated airman, said after the war, "The Mosquito was the best aircraft I ever flew. Fast, agile, reliable. It saved my life more times than I can count." The stories of individual Mosquito crews are extraordinary. There was Flight Lieutenant Tony Carlisle, who flew so many daring low-level raids over Germany that the Luftwaffe placed a bounty on him. Squadron leader John Wooldridge, who led the famous attack on Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen in 1945. Flying so low, his Mosquito's propellers churned up water from the harbor. And perhaps most remarkably, there was Group Captain Percy Pickard, who we mentioned earlier, the man who led Operation Jericho and died doing so. Before his final mission, he reportedly told his crew, "If we don't come back, at least we tried something worth doing." That spirit, the audacity to try something worth doing, defined the Mosquito and everyone who flew it. After the war ended, the Mosquito continued flying for several years, though the age of piston engines and wooden aircraft was clearly over. Jets were the future, and the Mosquito was a relic of a desperate time when Britain had to innovate or die. The very last combat sortie flown by a Mosquito occurred during the Malayan emergency in the 1950s, attacking communist guerrilla positions in dense jungle. By then, most had been retired or scrapped, their wooden frames deteriorating without the constant wartime maintenance. Today, fewer than 30 Mosquitoes survive worldwide, and only a handful are airworthy. But their legend endures. The Mosquito proved something that military planners still struggle to accept. Sometimes unconventional solutions, the ideas that sound crazy, the designs that everyone mocks, are exactly what's needed. Sometimes speed and precision matter more than armor and firepower. Sometimes 2 brave souls in a wooden plane can achieve what hundreds of heavily armed bombers cannot. Sir Geoffrey de Havilland, who endured years of ridicule for his wooden folly, was vindicated in the most satisfying way possible. After the war, he reflected, "They said it couldn't be done. They said wood was obsolete. They said speed without armor was suicide. They were wrong about everything." Air Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman, the man who backed de Havilland when no one else would, wrote in his memoirs, "The Mosquito was not just an aircraft. It was proof that courage and innovation can overcome any obstacle. Britain needed that proof in 1940, and the Mosquito delivered it. Even the Germans, in their post-war assessments, grudgingly admitted respect. Hermann Göring himself, in Allied captivity, was asked about the Mosquito. His response? "The Mosquito was the aircraft I feared most." We had nothing to match it. Coming from the man whose speech was interrupted by mosquito bombs, that admission must have been particularly bitter. The de Havilland Mosquito story is more than just aviation history. It's a reminder that in desperate times, the most radical ideas, the ones that make people laugh, the ones that defy conventional wisdom, might be exactly what saves you. It's about two men, de Havilland and Freeman, who believed in something everyone else dismissed. It's about furniture makers and piano builders who turned their craft into weapons of war. It's about pilots who flew a wooden plane into the teeth of Nazi Germany and came home to tell about it. And it's about a bizarre, impossible aircraft that shouldn't have worked, but terrorized the Third Reich, crashed Hitler's anniversary party, freed prisoners from execution, and proved that sometimes the best defense is simply being too fast for the enemy to catch. Just imagine a wooden bomber, unarmed and underestimated, screaming over Berlin at 400 miles per hour while Hermann Göring scrambles for cover and the Nazi high command realizes they've been beaten by plywood and glue. That's the Mosquito, the wooden wonder, the timber terror, the plane that won by refusing to fight fair.